This is This Week in Perspective with me, Adam Simbe. On Saturday, the 14th of October, Tanzanians of all walks of life will be marking the 18th anniversary of the death of Mwalimu Nyerere, the father of the nation. Some Tanzanians have repeatedly argued that we should not be celebrating Mwalimu's death, but rather his achievements, his works, his principles, and good leadership. Of course, his humanity to development. With me to discuss Mwalimu's anniversary are, on my left, Dr. Dina Mbaga, former University of Dar es Salaam, Education. Next to her is Dr. Benson Bana from the Department of Political Science and Administration, University of Dar es Salaam. Both of them regular participants of this program. On my right is Professor Samuel Wangwe. His description is quite big, but currently he's the chairman of the Daima Associate Consultants. But he was the founder and chairman of the Economic and Social Foundation. He's chairman of so many institutions. The one I can remember very quickly is the National Provident Fund. I don't know whether you're still there.
Called Social Security Fund.
Social Security Fund, okay. But he's also a regular participant on this program. Viewers, the fourth panelist, Joseph Mamnyange, the journalist, will be joining us as we go on. Now, let us start, and I'll start with you, Professor, because you're on my right.
Thank you.
But the question can be answered by the other panelists. How do you still remember Mwalimu today, 18 years after his death?
Yes, Mr. Simbe. I remember Mwalimu in terms of development and the economy. Because Mwalimu was consistently pursuing a kind of development which is people-centered. He really minded about the people, how development and the fruits of development could be shared broadly in society. And Mwalimu was, therefore, in this regard, very much concerned about the way the economy was under control of a minority of the Tanzanians and the foreigners. And his wish was really to see ownership of the economy broadly shared in the economy. And because at that time, the Tanzanians, especially the indigenous Tanzanians, were not capable of managing parts of the economy, he deliberately decided to have the bulk of the economy under the public ownership, under the state, on behalf of the people.
Yes.
So you can see consistently he was thinking about people and how they would control the economy. And in this regard, he really wished to build a strong economy. And that's why from the early times, he really focused on issues like agricultural transformation, where the majority of the people are. At that time, 95% of Tanzanians were in agriculture. And he saw development of the people as transforming the agricultural sector, actually. But he also didn't forget industry. He said, if you look at the history of development all over the world, there is no developed country which was not industrialized. So to him, it was really primary to see industrialization of the economy at that time.
To cut you short there,
yes,
as an addition, that maybe that tallies well with the Fifth Faith Administration focus on industrialization.
Exactly, in that regard. Although, because between him and now, quite a period passed where industrialization was at the back burner.
Yes.
And therefore we have to really revive. But he was committed to industrialization. And to him, he was, while industrializing, he was mindful of industrialization for the people. That's one reason why his priority sector was textiles, saying that textiles, first of all, is a sector which relies on cotton, where the majority, quite a number of people, many Tanzanians, 5, 6, 7 million Tanzanians were relying on cotton, growing cotton. But secondly, everybody was putting on clothes. So it's a basic consumer good for many Tanzanians. But third, he said the technology associated with textiles is within reach of a developing country like Tanzania. And finally, he observed that countries like England, where he actually studied in Scotland, so he knew, looking at the history of the Industrial Revolution, textile was quite...
even India.
Even India, textile was very important.
Countries, yes.
Yeah. But he also realized that we had to go to the next stage of producing capital goods, intermediate goods, and this was the task of the basic industry strategy. So to him, both agricultural transformation and industrialization were key, but always in mind benefit to the people.
Okay.
That's why his industrialization package included issues like stationery for education, pharmaceuticals for health, remembering that what do the majority of Tanzanians need. And the industrialization strategy to him was catering for basic goods, but also for the goods which produce those basic goods, that is intermediate goods, capital goods. So from the point of view of the economy, his articulation of people-centered development,
yes,
and consistently thinking about the people, to me is something which makes me really remember.
Would you remember how he described the development? I recall very quickly that development is not development of things. It's development of
people. Yes, and for this he was very consistent. And in his articulation of development, he did not look at the economy only, but he said provision of basic social services was critical. But he was very innovatively linking this to the economy. Because for instance, education, he would say, education, you need people who have skills to be able to run the economy. But you also need people who are liberated, using education as an instrument to liberate the human being. So all are centered around the human being, yes, but linking to the economy and to freedom of the people.
Yeah. That's why he's referred to as a humanist.
Exactly.
Dr. Bana, why do you still remember Mwalimu today?
Yeah, I still remember Mwalimu as a leader. And not only as a leader, but as a transformational leader. A leader who had a vision, who was a source of inspiration to many, and a leader who had his people at heart. As the professor correctly said, Nyerere was people-centered, especially the poor, the have-nots. So we will live to remember Mwalimu also of the values that he shared with us: equality, freedom, unity, brotherhood, and even the union is one of the most cherished values, yes, that Tanzanians will live to remember. So we remember Mwalimu also as a decision maker. He was able to make bold decisions that people are afraid to make today. You remember when we privatized the commanding heights of the economy. Yes. He was not shy and not a project to anybody. He made that decision and implemented the decision, notwithstanding the consequences.
So he used to walk the talk.
He used to talk the talk and walk the talk. And again, you remember when we privatized houses which were valued at 100,000 plus. Yes. People don't remember these decisions. These were bold decisions. Msajili wa Majumba was not born out of nowhere. Yes, a nationality that we cherish today. Yes. It has foundation. That was a bold decision. When he decided that, we want to build a nation, and there were constraints towards that end, he decided to privatize all schools that were owned by the missionaries.
Yes.
He was not shy.
Religious schools, as
yeah. And when he decided that, we cannot develop the people. I cannot, implement my people-centered policies if the peoples are scattered everywhere. They should be living together.
Or if there's no equality in attaining education, I suppose.
Of course. So when he launched his villagization policy to have all the people live together so that they can access essential social services, that was a bold decision. It was made, notwithstanding the consequences. So, in terms of leadership qualities,
Yes.
I remember Mwalimu as a transformational leader.
Thank you for Dr. Bana. Let's see what Dr. Bana has to say on this.
Dr. Bana?
I mean, Dr. Dina Mbaga. Sorry, Dr.
Yes, I concur with the two predecessors that Mwalimu was also a visionary. And when it comes to decision, as an educationist, I can't be away from education for self-reliance. So Mwalimu, as the name is, he's a teacher. He taught this nation a lot of things, like what he says, the agriculture, the economy. But Mwalimu could see that without education, there's no development. Therefore, he stressed on two aspects of education. The first thing is formal education, and education for all was introduced during his era. If I remember well, it was to start in earlier, about 10 years earlier, after the Addis Ababa meeting. But then, and why he said that is that he could see that he was aiming at fighting the three enemies that we had. That is ignorance, poverty, and diseases. So, talking about education, there was illiteracy. There was very high illiteracy in the country. So, Mwalimu introduced literacy education. And we didn't have to train teachers to be able to eradicate illiteracy. So, school children, teachers, people volunteered actually, even their houses. So people came out in good numbers to learn how to read and write. So the question of eradicating ignorance, that was number two. But then education for all, so that everybody gets the opportunity. Every child who is 7 years old should go to school.
We were very highly ranked in terms of illiteracy.
But as I say, he was broad when it comes to education. Because even when it came to agriculture, I remember slogans, not slogans, but because slogans sometimes they can't implement it. But when he says, kilimo cha kufa na kupona, I don't know how to translate in English, but really that let everybody go out and farm so that we get food. So that was one way, as Bunsen Bana mentioned, of making sure that everybody gets food and enough food. But let me then talk about education for self-reliance. It's unfortunate that it was misinterpreted by a lot of people. But what really should have been done is that education for self-reliance should make people self-reliant, give people the skills so that they can change and improve on their lives. It was misinterpreted by many as farming. Even those who lived in Dar es Salaam had to be ferried to places like Mlandizi and Ruvu to farm. But really what he meant was that people should get skills so that you could manage your life. As Professor Wangwe said, it was basic that when you finish school, then you can be a productive human being to your society, getting the skills. That's why our school then should have been skill development centers. So it's unfortunate that that was misinterpreted, but however, the principle should live up to today, and I think there are remnants of that. Like those of our age, we are still struggling to be self-reliant even after you have retired. So he injected that principle of being self-reliant. That's why even industries, he started a lot of industries, cashew nut, as he says, textile, bicycle making, medicine. Maalim wanted this country to be self-reliant. So that idea of being self-reliant injected in education. You know, if you want to bring a change, it should start with children, even at home, so that you inculcate the idea, the principle, so that you live by it. Yeah. So Maalim was a teacher. He taught this nation how to be self-reliant, how to unite, because Maalim said we are not, like when he appointed people to positions, he didn't look at where you come from. He looked at your qualification. So when some people thought that the Wahayas and the Chagas and the Nyakyusas were favored, it wasn't a favor, as he said in his books. It's because they were qualified and he wanted qualified people for the country. Yes. So we shouldn't discriminate people or appoint people because of where they come from, creed, color, or race, but because they can do the work. And I think if that principle is applied, this country is full of brains. Yes. So we are sure of moving forward. Yes. So that was Maalim's principle.
Yes. I recall during my days at Mzumbe Secondary School, we had to do all sorts of things. There are people who are doing farming, there are people who are doing all sorts of jobs and things at school like tailoring, like sewing, so that we become self-reliant, as it were.
No.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's very interesting. I'll ask Joseph when he joins us in terms of the media, as what you have described. But let's go on now. Professor Wangwe, how principled and ethical was Mwalimu's leadership?
Oh, very high. He was principled and committed to those principles in an amazingly consistent manner. You read all his writings, all his books, you find a thread running through which really cultivates the same principles in a very consistent way. You find people-centered development all through. You find that sense of being humane and caring about the people all through. So he was very consistent indeed. Even his engagement in the liberation of Africa was based on people-centered development and really in believing that human beings are equal and have equal right in that sense. So he was very consistent. And ethics were very high indeed. Because he himself, what he was saying and what he was doing, nobody could detect.
And what he believed in?
He believed in, very consistent.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Is it, I don't know, is this trait of Mwalimu, what you've just described, continued for in leadership in this country after his death?
Not to that extent. We can see beginnings of that, especially in this phase.
Yes.
And I think it's moving in that direction.
Yes.
Yeah. But we have yet to see it. Give it time. So,
okay. Yeah. Yes, Dr. Benson.
I think
in terms of
there have been efforts to try to translate what Maalim believed was right for the Tanzanians by the past regimes.
Or successive regimes,
Yeah,
as
successive
it were.
regimes. But as the professor said, not to the extent that you would have expected. But you look at what the Fifth Faith government is doing, you can see there are strong elements that are derived from the legacy of Maalim. For instance, the focus to the rural poor, policies that are oriented at at least empowering the toiling masses in the countryside, you can see that there is that spirit. The intention is bright. We don't know whether they will have the capacity to implement what they're saying, but at least the Fifth Faith government is trying. And then when it comes to values, Mwalimu had specific values. There is a way in which he conceived people assisting him, the leaders of the time. He had the qualities that he prescribed, and they are well documented in the Arusha Declaration. If you look at what the Fifth Faith government is trying to do, cracking down corruption, instilling discipline to the civil service, transparency, bold decision making, and not being afraid to the so-called development partners. Crude investors are faced with crude measures, tough measures. You know the Makinikia saga.
Yes.
And no, who could attempt to crack them down?
Yes.
So there are measures that are being taken by the current government to at least revive Mwalimu's legacy. And if you look at the Fourth Faith government, there are areas which were addressed that that were in consonance with what Mwalimu Nyerere was all out to implement. It's hard to mention some, but you look at the President President Kikwete, sorry. There are areas that he addressed which reflected the thinking and the political philosophy of Mwalimu. One thing that I shouldn't forget, his interpretation, we're talking about the values that Nyerere stood for, his interpretation of democracy and the way we are practicing it today. I think if Mwalimu was living today,
Yes.
he would redefine the concept of democracy in the Tanzanian context. He warned us, I think that was in 1991, 92, in one
During
of
the
his speeches
Kilimanjaro?
in Brazil.
Brazil,
When
okay.
he said, democracy is not like a bottle of Coca-Cola, which you can import and sell. Democracy should be context sensitive, should take into account the internal dynamics of a country. But if I look today, our political landscape, the way people interpret democracy, the concept of shrinking democracy, it's it diverges very much from what Mwalimu believed democracy was. To Mwalimu wanted a democracy that would protect peace, unity, freedom, democracy that was pro-people. But today I see the kind of democracy that we are advocating diverging very much from the main pillars that this country, this nation was anchored upon.
Is it because democracy, I agree with you, is or the concept of democracy perceived by Tanzanians is still has not sunk in, and we, as it were, we don't really understand the basic democracy. What kind of democracy are we talking about? Is it Western democracy or Tanzanian democracy or African democracy? Mwalimu used to describe this, isn't it?
Sure.
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, Professor.
I think the way the West interpreted it for us, and actually tying it even to aid.
Yes.
That the democracy was multi-party democracy, freedom of speech interpreted in a certain way.
Yes.
Mere democracy look as if it's what Dr. Bana says, you can import it into any country.
Yes.
But Mwalimu again was consistently thinking of people-centered development. Therefore, it's people-centered democracy, a kind of a democracy which gives freedom to the people, they can express themselves, they can participate in their development process, a kind of democracy which is really people-centered. And I agree with Dr. Bana that it can only be interpreted in specific contexts and not to be imposed from outside. As we
it's not one size fits all?
No, it's not one size fits all.
Dina, sorry. You wanted to come in as Dr. Bana was talking.
Yeah, we are talking about leadership.
Yes.
Leadership is a virtue. And Mwalimu had that virtue of leadership. As he said, he had his people in his heart. He had us in his heart, and everything he did was for the best of the people. How many presidents would have only one house in Msasani? A president. You have all the resources in your hand. But Mwalimu believed in sharing all the resources, that every Tanzanian has a right to the resources.
The national cake, as it were.
It's a national cake, and everybody should get their share. And that's what we said about African socialism. You can't see your neighbor dying and be happy. You can't say you see your neighbor being accused of something and be happy about it and just walk away. So Mwalimu had us in his heart. That's why he did everything for Tanzanians. And what I heard is that when he was at his dying bed, he even said, I know Tanzanians will cry for me. And I think you are still crying for him.
Oh, yes. I will continue crying for him.
Because he had us in his heart. He did everything for us. He laid the principles, as Bana said. The principle of non-racial, non-discrimination, non-tribal. He promoted us women.
Non-religious.
He believed that we had our role, the BBTTs and everybody. He respected women. But Mwalimu was also very religious. Every morning he went to St. Peter's to pray. I happened to do a research on liberation for Africa, and the question I asked some people is, why was he going to St. Peter's every morning?
And not
a president going to St. Peter's and then going back and then going to the State House. And somebody who was very close to Mwalimu told me that Mwalimu said Tanzanians know that I'm their president and they have very high expectations. Therefore, I would like to ask God, 10 Tanzanians. I mean, what else could we have asked for? Somebody who had us in his heart. And Mwalimu believed that in humanity, but also in Africanness, that Africa is one. He was not only for us, he was the icon of Africa. And thus, as Professor Wangwe mentioned, liberation for Africa. He was the architect behind the liberation for Africa. He believed that we have to light this torch at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro and let it shine throughout Africa. And Tanzanians, we forsake everything for everybody. It's because we believed in Mwalimu. Otherwise, we could have said, we don't want this. And why should I fight for South Africa? But Mwalimu believes that in freedom for everybody. And he said, if our neighbors are not free, we can't be happy, which is true. Because even if it's your next door neighbor, I remember living in somewhere in Dar es Salaam, and the neighbor, they were always fighting at night. And one of my daughters could never sleep because she says, why are they doing that? So think of a country where there's no peace. We can't be peaceful. So Mwalimu was, for us, he liked peace. He wanted everybody to be free, but everybody to participate in development of this country. That's why he urged everybody to work hard. Work hard wherever you are.
You referred to earlier when you were discussing about the first question that Mwalimu had vision. Yeah. Would you remind the viewers what that vision is? Because in the process, 18 years since he died, maybe people have lost the vision of what Mwalimu's vision was.
Not only people have lost, but the new generation maybe doesn't know that Mwalimu had a vision. he wished this country well. He wanted us to be self-reliant, have our own industries, but also spread the industries to the rural areas so that people could be employed, so that whatever we produce could be changed so that we can export. So he had a vision of a country where there is peace, everybody is enjoying their freedom. But then he said self-government is not just enough only with self-government. We must also be, as I'm saying, self-reliant. So those two things went together. Most of us thought that it was enough with the flag, but he wanted us to be more than just having a flag. Be independent, not dependent. And that's why he was not even ashamed to say, we can live without you, because he could see other countries were like bullying us, saying you can't do, like when you mentioned about nationalization.
Yeah.
How can you nationalize when you have so few educated people, when you don't have accountants, you don't have people who have many economists? Remember when we became independent, there was only a handful of people who were qualified.
Engineers, economists.
But you see, there is a difference between intelligence, commitment, and self-sacrifice.
And patriotism as well.
And patriotism, yeah. So my daughter is not living in this country, but one day she asked me, Mama, where is that nationalism you people are praying about? So you see, she could see that something is amiss. So we need to go back to the principles. Mwalimu had a vision. Mwalimu loved this country. He loved the people, and he worked hard. He was selfless. He was not selfish. He sacrificed.
That's very interesting. Now, let me come back to you, Professor.
Yes.
Wangui. Did Mwalimu's leadership and quality of that leadership provide a benchmark, even today, against which we Tanzanians measure political leadership? Do you think the way his quality you have well described it is,
Yes.
has it provided a benchmark on which we Tanzanians measure against leaders?
I believe
Present or in the
yes,
future?
I believe he did. You remember, even after he had actually left.
After he retired.
After he retired.
Yes.
Every time there was a problem, especially facing the poor, the disadvantaged, the vulnerable groups in society, they would call upon him. Mwalimu, Mwalimu. They missed him in that sense.
Yes.
So, and even up to now, I think it is a challenge to the leaders who followed, because much of people still remember what Mwalimu stood for, what Mwalimu was. So in many ways, I believe it is establishing some kind of benchmark against which they say, oh, there is deficiency in this leadership, deficiency there, deficiency there.
Just for Tanzania or for the rest of Africa as well?
Even for the rest of Africa, even beyond.
Yes.
Actually, he's a benchmark in that sense.
Benchmark?
Sure, he has said it all. I think we draw reference
Yes.
on several occasions on what Mwalimu stood for. And we judge our leaders, we evaluate our leaders against the standards that Mwalimu set. Although it's difficult, Mwalimu was a different individual, a special individual, a brilliant leader. And Africa hasn't produced such a leader. You can compare Mwalimu with Mandela, but Mwalimu was not Mandela, was more than Mandela. So in a way, Mwalimu left benchmarks, left standards against which we can measure our current leadership and future leadership.
I recall in October when he died, a BBC commentator said it all, and he said, for Tanzania and Africa, the death of Mwalimu will indeed leave a gap, because there'll be no Mwalimu. He was a special Mwalimu, unique leader. Don't expect to have another Mwalimu.
Yeah.
No?
I look at, I would like to compare Mwalimu's leadership and people after him.
Yes.
I look at it as a concept. Writing a concept, you have to think, you have to be committed, you have to, and writing a concept might be more difficult than writing a thesis. So Mwalimu had, as I said, a vision, but he had something which you can't cut and paste. It has to come from within.
You.
His leadership came from within him, and there's a lot of rhetoric and references, and that also shows that it's a benchmark.
Yes.
References wherever somebody wants to be looked up upon, he thinks I'm ameliorating Mwalimu. I mean, which is a good way. So we are still up to today trying to measure up to Mwalimu's standards, but it's not easy. However, maybe the best you can do is to analyze, to rethink, sit together and look at all these things we are mentioning today and other people are mentioning about Mwalimu, and say, how can we measure to that? For example, Mwalimu was a teacher and Mwalimu wrote. You know, when the East African community fell, it was an abrupt thing. People took away planes and all this. They took material things. But if you go to our archives in Dodoma, we have the text. We have all the contracts. Everything is there. So we have a treasure. So Mwalimu has, and I would like these books, for those who haven't read them, to read them. We have here freedom and development. We have freedom and socialism. And we have freedom and national building. Now, this Mwalimu has left a legacy. We have everything. There's nothing not said in these books. And I chose these three because Mwalimu has a whole library of books. Something which, if we go back to, we have Africa, as everybody was looking at Mwalimu that time. Today, people are still looking at Tanzania. But we have forgotten a lot of these principles. Our unity, our principles of development, our socialism.
Are these writing, for example, accessible to every Tanzanian?
They are accessible indeed.
Because we have this habit, which everybody talks about, as being non-book readers for Tanzanians. Eh?
Maybe it's high time we change our attitudes. And get to start reading. Yes. I mean, schools can use this to build our youngsters.
Are they in the school's library? Are they available in the school's library?
I think they can be reprinted if it is accepted that they. For me, I revisited them because of this program, and I could even see new things coming up. You reflect, and we are saying we are celebrating his death is because we are missing him.
Yes.
You know, when a parent dies, you cry. So we are celebrating the death because we are crying. We have missed Mwalimu, but Mwalimu has left us a lot of principles in his writings.
Do you have a feeling that I also have all the time? Particularly when I watch Mwalimu's speeches, kind of snaps of his speech on television, that it's like Mwalimu is still up there in Butiama, other than his grave. He's still alive.
That is also a legacy. I think we are the only country in the world still being led by Mwalimu.
Is that so, Bana?
Partly, yes.
Every day you hear those Osia Wababa or whatever it's called. And let me tell you, you will be surprised. I wish somebody could do research. A lot of people are watching those things. And they're making a lot of sense. Like when he says, if you can't find an expert here in Tanzania, look at Kenya, look at Uganda.
Before you
Instead
go
of
outside.
looking outside. Gee, what else can we ask for? We are devaluing ourselves.
Yes.
But we are full of professionals who are. Yeah.
Viewers, Joseph Wamnyange from the East African...
No, I'm not from it. I'm just a private media consultant. I don't work for the
Yes,
East
all
African.
right. He
Sorry.
doesn't work for the East African these days. I hear he is private consultant, has joined us. And I asked him to come specifically, as you can see, because I wanted to remember Mwalimu on the issues of the economy, politics, education, and the media. Now, why do you still Mwalimu? Why do you still remember Mwalimu 18 years after his death in your relevant area of profession?
You know, it's so surprising that we have a diverse field of media outlets now. But if you look at the substance that's there, it isn't as it was during Mwalimu, even though there were just a few outlets. You know, there were Radio Tanzania, there was Mzalendo,
The
and the
Nationalist.
newspaper, the Nationalist. If you look at the seriousness that was there during that time and now, there's a very, very big difference. We need to go back as to know where are we going, because the reportage at times or the analysis that you see in the media at times is so unresearched. It's like you wonder what is happening. Even the grammar at times it leaves a lot to be desired. sorry to say, but if you like the lady here was saying, Mwalimu, you know, he was very eloquent in the English language,
Yes.
very
In
fluent
Swahili.
in Swahili,
Yes.
you know. But this is where we are lacking nowadays in the media. The grasp of the language, whether it be Swahili or English, you know, we are caught in between. You know, I remember Professor Posse from the university, at one time they were interviewing her. And she said, no, you people are saying that we should teach in English, you know, we should teach in Swahili. Yes. But if I tell you I mark journalists that are training to be journalists,
yes.
even Swahili, they don't know Swahili. So we should go back and, you know, do some homework. Yes. Which language you want to use? Yes. If we want to use it, do we have ample material? Like Mwalimu's literature, the books that he wrote.
Yes.
You know, madam, the other thing we have a problem is the reading culture is going. Mm-hmm. It's just going down. And, you know, instead of having bookshops in the streets, we have a lot of bars. You know, that's the norm now. You know, instead of bookshops. Yes. You know, you just tell me, how many libraries do we have in Dar es Salaam? How many libraries? You don't, you know, it's only one library, you know.
But you have second-hand booksellers everywhere, in every corner.
But who has access to those second-hand books on Sokoine Drive? Would somebody in Tabata come to Sokoine to buy those books? No. But we need to have, you know, develop a reading culture. Like Mwalimu, there was the time that the General Wamnyange visited Mwalimu at his place in Butiama. He said, Joseph, that man reads. He has a container of books, you see? So we should inculcate this culture in our children, that they should read. That's why Mwalimu, you know, could speak eloquent about everything and anything, because he read a lot. We're not reading a lot, but we want to talk a lot. That's the problem. Sorry to say.
No, that's a very punchy statement. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph, despite you came a bit late. Now, you reacted to this question as well. Professor Wangwe, and the rest of you, would you agree that Mwalimu had a deep sense of morality in his leadership quality and the way he lived, so that can be emulated?
Yes. As we said, he was very consistent in what he was saying and how he was living. Very consistent. That's why, as our colleague mentioned, he had only one house. Even his house in Butiama, they had to build a house for him.
They had to impose it on him,
and
I
he
suppose.
was saying, you know, I don't need a huge house. So, kwani mimi ni tembo?
Yes.
Am I an elephant? You know? So what he was needing is basic needs that a human being requires. It's not well beyond what we're seeing now. So his morality was very high, consistently, as a leader. But I would say as a leader, he was, maybe because of this, he was very confident as a leader. And because he was confident, he would listen. Very carefully, he was a very good listener. In the end, he would make the decision, but he was a very good listener. But third, Mwalimu was ready to admit where he had made mistakes.
To agree,
Yes.
to disagree.
And these are qualities of a confident leader.
Yes,
And a committed leader.
yes.
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Mbaga?
There is a book Mwalimu wrote to Jisaishe. I just want to add to what Professor Wango said, that he was ready to be corrected. But also, Mwalimu was ready to do an assessment of what he's done. Like we had 5 years development plan. He would always say, I mean, look at that development, the first 5 years development plan, see how much we've achieved, what challenges have we gone, then we correct ourselves. So he didn't just like, he wasn't a bulldozer, I'm sorry. I can't find the right word, but he was not like pushing things.
He pushed it,
Let's
that's
do
right.
this. Then let's go back. Have we done what we wanted to do? I remember in 1984, if I remember correctly, there was an assessment, or we can say monitoring of the education for self-reliance.
Yes.
How well have we done? What is it that we haven't been done? And one of the arguments I remember was that we say people should go and live in the rural area. Professor Wangwe, Basen Bana, yourself, myself, we are living in Dar es Salaam. Are we expecting our children to go back to the village and live? So,
Which
there-
the
was-
village usually they don't know in
it
any
was a
case.
misconception. So we should rethink or go back and correct wherever we went wrong. That we are saying we are going to live in the village, but actually we are living in Dar es Salaam. Even when you retire, you are still in Dar es Salaam. You know? So Mwalimu had checklists. I mean, are we on the right track? That's the word I'll use. Are we in the right track? If not, what can we do? You know? So
I recall at one time, you come in, Joseph. I recall at one time I read what he said, that he was asked, I think, by a Western journalist, Mwalimu, you've now retired, but if you had the opportunity to go back, would you do the same things the same way? And Mwalimu said, no. Being outside, I've seen a lot. I'll do it differently. Yes.
You're talking about morality. Like Professor Wang was saying, you know, there's a saying that it's only the strong that can say, I'm sorry. The weak will never say, I'm sorry, because they think they're exposing themselves, they're exposing their weakness. From a morality point of view, you can't compare Mwalimu with any of our current leaders, sorry to say. His moral standing was just so high that it's very difficult to, you know, to have somebody that would, you know, be compared to him.
His shoe is very big.
Come again?
His shoe,
Yeah.
his shoes are so
So
big,
big.
they
to
can't
fill
fit.
them.
They can't fit our legs.
You know, because the moral aspect is very important for us to develop. If you have leaders that are immoral or not trustworthy, or leaders that are not confident, leaders that can't listen to maybe their advisors, you know, we are in hot shit. But morality is the cornerstone of everything. Because Mwalimu was so, you know, the Western world sabotaged Mwalimu, in my view. You know, people blame Mwalimu that because of Ujamaa it failed. Ujamaa wouldn't have failed. Look at China now. Look at China. They developed through Ujamaa. But because we are so small, they sabotaged some of the things that we wanted to do with their structural adjustment programs, HIPIC. You know, we are so rich, but how are we so poor? You know, there's a sabotage that they did to us, but we didn't realize that it was, you know, it was sabotage. That's why in 1985, Mwalimu said, okay, I'm stepping down. Let others, you know, carry on the battle. But from a moral point of view, Mwalimu was just in a world of his own.
I agree totally with what Joseph says. And we can talk about immorality, immoral behavior. But you look at the decisions that Mwalimu made over time, they are well aligned with what a moral leader should do. Look, he decided to step aside out of power voluntarily without any push. That it was an act of morality. Remember those days, an African leader deciding voluntarily to step out of power. It's unbelievable. And you remember the other time when people started polluting the union, the way he put it. He was not afraid to ask Jombe to stay aside. May God rest his soul in eternal peace. You remember when people started, you remember one of his speeches in which he delves on the cracks within the United Republic of Tanzania, touches on religious sentiments, on anti-union sentiments, and he was not shy. He pointed an accusing finger to people who wanted to break the union by a number of reasons. He didn't mess up his words. He called a spade a spade. Yeah. So that's what a moral leader would go out to tell his people.
Yeah. I mean, time seems to be running out, but I had put aside here a few statements I lifted up in the writings of one of Tanzanian's leaders who worked and knows Mwalimu very well, Mzee Pius Msekwa. I think, let me very quickly say this. For example, Mzee Pius Msekwa says, Mwalimu provided exemplary leadership, was unique and rare example of a leader who lived and practiced the desired ethics. They talked about that. There is need to emulate Mwalimu's leadership style by the current young generation of leaders, which was firmly based on the strict observance and practice of leadership ethics again. Mwalimu was a man of principles and a humanist. You've talked about the principles of Mwalimu. Mwalimu wisely recommended that the constitution should be amended to provide term limits for any president to hold that office. It should not be left to the individual holder of the office to decide when to retire, but the decision should be made for him, I added her, by the Constitution. These are some of the statements of Mwalimu. Okay, now time seems to be against us now. Let us wind up very quickly. And I want you to reflect on this and answer very, very, very quickly. Finally, how and on which specific areas would you, and indeed the country, measure Mwalimu's contribution to Tanzania, Africa, and the world? Joseph, very quickly.
He was very patriotic. He never hesitated to be in the patriotic front. He knew that the rest of Africa had to be liberated for Tanzania to hold his head high, that it was free. And he loved this country from the bottom of his heart. We need that in every Tanzania, not only the leaders. We need to be patriotic to our country. Let's love this country like nothing else.
There's only one Tanzania.
There's only one Tanzania. Yes.
Professor, very quickly.
Yes, Mwalimu believed the basic needs are the same for all human beings.
Yes.
And all human beings have the right to have access to basic needs. And that's how he saw development for the people. People-centered development, because for all people to have access to development, fruits of development. I think that really makes him stand out in Tanzania, in the region, and all of
Sabana, very quickly.
I think Mwalimu stands out on his drive towards peaceful decolonization, insisting hard work, and instilling in the people the self-reliant spirit to avoid dependence on imperial powers.
Dina?
Mwalimu wanted us, or tried to make sure that we have a critical mind. If you have a critical mind, you won't be bullied. If you have a critical mind, you will think before you leap. If you have a critical mind, it's not easy to be pushed left, right, and center. Therefore, we should build those kind of qualities in our children, in our young people.
Can we build this in schools?
And
How can we teach this?
And deconstruct what has been preached all along, that this is a poor country. Because if we internalize that, we'll continue to be poor. We are not poor, we are rich, and let's all work to be rich and constructive people.
And the spirit of self-reliance
Yeah.
should be there.
Yeah.
Because even in a capitalist country, you should be self-reliant. That's what Nyerere was saying in Ujamaa.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, whether it's Ujamaa or capitalism, you should need to be self-reliant.
Yes. Well, my panelists, thank you very much for your contribution. Sorry, Joseph, but you've made a major contribution towards the end of the discussion. I wish you were there from the beginning, but whatever that you have contributed has had an impact. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Bana. Thank you, Dr. Dinambaga, for your contribution for this very interesting subject of Mwalimu as a leader. And we are marking 18 years after his death. But for us, for all Tanzanians, we have to remember Mwalimu. And what he did leaves fond of memories for all of us to continue remembering him. The question will be, are we emulating his teachings, his practices, his principles? And if we don't, what will happen to the future generation? Viewers, you have the views of my panelists here. We have been without Mwalimu for 18 years since his death, but his principles, vision, and what he stood for, and his legacy are still in the minds of many Tanzanians, including these Tanzanians here. And perhaps more ordinary Tanzanians, as they will still remember him, as was a man of the people, and he believed in development of the people-centered development, and focusing on the rural people as well as the poor. We still adore him, cherish him, his quality leadership, including ethical, his stand on many social issues, and his efforts to fight corruption. He referred to it. Certainly, his leadership qualities are to the contemporary leadership something fundamental and worthy of emulating. Whether we should always celebrate his death or his work, as asked by Mzee Msekwa recently in his writings, is it something we should all ponder and seriously examine as we mark the 18th anniversary of his death? This is all we have for you today, until next Sunday at 21 hours, and on Thursday at 15 hours for the repeat program. On behalf of my panel here, very capable panel, Joseph Mwamnyange, Professor Samuel Wangwe, Dr. Benson Bana, Dr. Dina Mbaga, and my TBC Television Center crew. Thank you, viewers, and goodbye.